I think the first thing I was wondering is what you consider to be a domesticated animal.
Well, I was actually trying to be very, very uh, open-minded about what would be a domesticated animal because, you know, lap dogs and cats, and the requisite pet sitting on an evil person's lap kind of thing is so old hat. Anyway, welcome everybody if you're watching. Dive into world building. We're talking about domesticated animals and defining that relatively broadly, I hope. Because I don't know, I was thinking about how we would talk about sort of the coevolution of animals species and human species, and you know, because so we've got horses at least, and we've got food animals, and you know,
Okay.
yeah, there's all kinds of options.
Goes all the way down to silkworms.
Yeah.
Hookworms, awesome. See?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I think you could count escargot too. They could probably live on their own without us, and they wouldn't taste as good.
Yeah. Right.
So, so domesticated animals in world building.
Yeah.
This is an interesting topic for me because of it's something I kind of don't put a lot of thought into it, except that in that project that I'm working on with my friend Devin, the post-apocalyptic dystopian world I've been talking about
Yeah.
for the past couple sessions, there's some major issues in terms of animals because there has been a couple hundred years before the story starts, a great cataclysm, and how that impacted the animals. It was kind of important to kind of go into that, particularly because there's a lot of awareness, people studying, like, okay, life after people and things like that that have been showing up on channels like the Discovery Channel and all of that. So I felt like it was like one of those big things that it's like, well, you can't really ignore it, right?
Yeah, right. Well, you shouldn't, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of interesting because, I mean, there are farm animals, food animals, but pets aren't really a thing in this world. And so
What aren't?
pets.
Pets.
Like there's
Oh,
not,
pets, yeah.
yeah. And neither do they have large work animals. So everything has to happen through like human effort. And then when it comes to animals that have a close relationship with human beings, it's an indicator of something else going on in the world, meaning that probably the person who is able to communicate with animals has a magical ability, or it indicates that there's something wrong with the animal. So that's kind of the way that we've handled that. The other thing is evolution. Now, in conventional wisdom and science postulates that after people, basically dogs as we come to understand them would be gone, right? Like they wouldn't survive on their own because they've been bred to such a degree that they couldn't, right? What we did in our world was we imagined that there would be dogs. It's just that the kind of dogs that would survive would either have to be incredibly large and able to kind of crossbreed with things like coyotes and wolves, or they'd be really tiny and the way like have like really good camouflage or hiding sort of abilities. So we went with the large because there's like lots of fun, scary things you can do, and we call them fairy dogs. So it's a holdover, and the name of them is supposed to be an indicator of the cultural history that is kind of lost in that a fairy dog is a Celtic idea. But they call them the fairy dogs, and they're like these huge, ginormous things. But anyway, I mean, I guess the point of my big rambling rant on that is that's how I've attacked the issue of what happens, in this particular world and what it indicates. Because often it's kind of a cliche that we, in fiction, use a character's attitudes toward domesticated animals to tell the reader something about the person, whether they're kind, whether they're responsible, whether they have concerns for things outside of themselves. And I thought, well, what if this is an indicator for something a little bit different than that in a character?
Okay, so like what?
Well, I had mentioned earlier, like whether or not a certain character has a magical...
Oh, had a magical power, or okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you know, it's funny because what you were saying about the giant dogs reminds me of a short story that was written by Janice Hardy for the anthology 8 Against Reality. And it was basically about gigantic feral dogs in post-apocalyptic Georgia.
Oh, no way!
So you should go look for that one.
I'm going to look for that one. I should find it.
I'm not even remembering what it was called. Dang, it was fun. But anyway, so it's yeah, it's in 8 Against Reality, which is from Panverse Publishing. Fun little story. Humans trying to beat the dogs to the food, basically, was what was going on there. I liked what you said about stories often using animals as a gauge of character, because you do see that a lot. I mean, I keep coming back to the image of Dr. Evil with the cat, but but when you put an animal in something, it's most often deliberate, and it has very specific kinds of effects on the story and on our perceptions of the character. So, so that's cool. I was thinking also about, so for example, sight dogs. Isn't that what they're called? Hunting dogs?
Okay.
Oh, hi there, Glenda.
Hi.
It's dark where you live.
I'm in an unusual place, and there's a window behind me.
Oh, there we go. That explains it. Welcome, welcome. Yes, you know, I was thinking about the dogs that would ride on the horses in, I think it was North Africa and maybe Persia. Is this ringing a bell?
Okay.
But what I was thinking about was that there are very different kinds of relationships that can grow between people and their animals, depending on whether those animals are working animals or whether they're simply companion animals.
Well, it's long been pointed out that how you treat an animal is an indication of how you treat people. So it's a shorthand way to describe a character.
That's true.
But now I've seen a lot of dogs go feral in a war zone, and I don't know how size would turn out, but I doubt if they'd really go for giant. Medium size seems to be what survives best in that kind of conditions.
Okay.
And there are some human cultures that have half feral dogs, village dogs in Africa in particular.
Sorry?
There are a lot of village dogs in places like Africa that are still kind of half feral. I think
yeah.
they survive pretty easily.
Well, would you say that it would that the evolution of the dogs in size and features might be sort of dependent on the conditions of survival? Like if it was war, or if it was more like they had access to a large woodland area.
I'm sure it would.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
thing we know about domestic species is that all of them have higher mutation rates
Okay.
than wild species do, and so do we. We are both changing each other, and we're doing it faster than any wild species would.
That's interesting.
So whatever your conditions are, I'm sure that would happen fairly quickly. The fox experiments, you've heard about those?
Yeah.
With choosing for the tamer qualities, and a whole suite of other characters change too.
Yeah, like the coat was spotted and various things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on a puppy-like demeanor, and their coat changed, their shape changed, their behavior, all of it, all at once, and in only a handful of generations. Of course, sometimes I think the devil dogs do that just to devil me. I've got a pack of 3 out in the backyard, and things change fast from day to day.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. So, watchdogs. Let's think about some of the things that animals do for people, roles that they might take in a story. So, you know, watchdogs, companions,
work animal.
Yeah.
There's
Hunting.
food. There's fiber. Because we keep sheep and silkworms for the same reasons.
Okay, yeah.
I like the familiar idea.
Oh, familiars, yeah.
A domestic animal in order to keep ourselves sane and balanced.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine has a service dog because she has Addison's disease, and the dog has been trained to respond to her endocrine output to alert her when she needs to take her medicine.
Wow, that's amazing.
It would be easy for a whole culture to develop that. Yeah, I got to bow out for a second. I've got a phone call.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, assistance animals.
Yeah.
I think my uncle had a Labrador Retriever that was supposed to be a helper dog. He's and then there was I don't know. Does anybody remember anything about or know anything about helper monkeys? Didn't they determine that to be not a good idea?
I don't know. My daughter read a book about the first.
But
My daughter read a book about the early times when people were first domesticating dogs to aid the blind, as opposed to aid other kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
Because apparently dogs had been helper dogs for disabled people in various ways, but at a certain point hadn't been introduced to, you know, the very, I would say, very taxing work of working with the blind, right? And so that's definitely something that is worth researching. I was actually thinking about dogs in airports. You know, the bomb sniffer, pot sniffer dogs.
Yes.
Because I had to come up with a useful way of creating a security checkpoint in my barn world, and I wanted there to be a way of detecting poisons that might be carried in by people to a gathering, or also to detect energy weapons. So, so I got to invent this little critter called a tunnel hound, which looks a lot like a dog, but really isn't. It's sort of like a cross between a dog and a platypus.
Oh wow, that's a serious chimera right there.
Well, the whole idea behind it was that, you know, I was thinking about how platypi have the ability to sense electromagnetic activity built into these special sensory organs in their bills, and I thought, well, if you were able to sense electromagnetic things of various types, you might be able to detect an energy weapon battery if somebody was, carrying it into your event. So these are little cave dwellers, and they sort of look like black and gray puppies, and they have these very wide noses, but they have no eyes.
Oh wow!
And so they get trained and carried around by the soldiers, and they basically run you past the gauntlet of tunnel hounds before you go into the big party. Make sure that nobody will be carrying poisons or energy weapons, because they can smell the poisons and they can sense the energy weapons with their little snoots. And they're not pets.
Okay.
They're I don't know. Well, Nicantor is, I guess, a special case because there are a lot of things that make him feel nervous, but he really hates tunnel hounds. They make his skin crawl. I think partly because he just can't stand the fact that they have no eyes, and he thinks they belong back in the tunnels and not in the nice places where people are. But
yeah,
it was kind of fun to put those guys together and say, here is a great place where I could have an animal that would do something very specific, and provide a service in a way that would be unexpected.
I think that's interesting, and I think that animals with no eyes really are just inherently creepy, because you see the features of a face, right? And yet there's one component that's missing, and it's missing naturally. It's not as if the animal was injured. And there is something about that. And I think that we have sort of a knee-jerk instinctual reaction to things like that as human beings, because of the way our brains are wired for pattern recognition.
Right.
So I think it's a really good sort of device to sort of point out something a little bit amiss or intimidating,
Well, it's certainly. I don't think it's. How would I describe it in my environment? It's, I guess, describing that all is not well. It's showing that all is not well, because they have to have these around to make sure that nobody's trying to kill each other, I suppose. But also, it's just to indicate that the world works in a very different way. One of the tricky parts is, for me, I have this thing called the translation problem, and it has to do with that thing where they say, if it's a rabbit, if it looks like a rabbit and smells like a rabbit, and it acts like a rabbit, then call it a rabbit, right? So actually, the barn has rabbits, right? But at the same time, it has other things that are not like Earth animals. And I kind of go back and forth on it a little bit, right? But my solution is to say that actually rabbit is a translation for what this animal would actually be called. It's just that I don't want readers to have to go through the effort of having to translate it and learn the word. So I'll call it a rabbit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
Animals being domesticated by humans, because an alien species might do it in an entirely different way.
Yeah, that's true. That brings up the question of how we domesticated our animals in the first place.
Yeah.
I was going to say I'm not sure we did with cats, but they have gone through physical change. They've lost about a third of their actual brain size.
What was that, with a third of their brain size?
It's significantly smaller in domestic cats than in the wild species.
Oh, wow, interesting.
I didn't know that.
I don't think it's because they're stupider. I think it's because they may have dropped some unnecessary stuff that they weren't supposed to do.
That's possible.
The food and the fleas and all of that stuff, and they didn't have to.
Yeah. Things I was going to mention earlier about calling a rabbit, and kind of making choices about when you create a new word to describe an animal or not. I think it's really smart for writers of genre to take a look at that, because sometimes we can be pretty jargon heavy with new things for the reader.
Well, there are a couple of traps actually with that.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to be forced to learn a word for something that you already know the word for.
Yeah.
So if the congruence of your animal to an earthly animal is really, really high, just calling it that is a nod to your reader and saying, okay, well, I'm not gonna make you do extra work to learn a word for something that you already recognize, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could use it for story purposes.
Yeah, absolutely you can. And you can teach these words. You can teach, whatever vocabulary is needed, but you don't want to
It would be
have
human.
to teach everything.
It would be human making an assumption, because they look at something that seems familiar, like a dog or a cat, and not understanding what the relationship really is in another setting with another species.
Yeah.
You can use that to generate conflicts or accidents or a whole new symbiotic relationship. Once humans figure out what the heck is really going on, they might decide they want to try it.
Yeah. I think that if you end up having to name every last little thing in your environment, it restricts the number of things you could put in your environment.
That makes sense.
Um,
I keep saying all these things that really make a person think, and then I just fall absolutely silent. Because I've turned over.
I read a book one time where, it had been recommended to me as a book that really showed a super alien world and a super alien worldview, and I can't even remember what book it was, which is probably for the best because I didn't like it that much. What I found was that it was so alien in part because nothing had any kind of, everything was renamed, right?
Okay.
And that was cool, and the way people thought was largely different, but at the same time, the whole place felt really sparse because, the same trees and bushes seemed to be everywhere, and you could tell that the overall burden of having to rename everything in an ecosystem was so great that it detracted from the story's ability to portray that kind of biodiversity, the kind that you would sort of expect. And I know that doesn't really have much to do with domesticated animals, but domesticated animals were part of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, if you think about it, like, you go outside, you're going to see the local... Chances are you're going to see different kinds of birds or rodents, especially, where I live, there's, like, all kinds of... Well, there's bears in my backyard,
Mm-hmm.
And if you had to rename every single thing just from stepping from an interior place to an exterior place, then, I mean, that would be a huge undertaking. Your paragraph would be 5 pages long.
Well, and when I think about, for example, if you look at Watership Down,
Mm-hmm.
The author uses an incredible amount, a profusion of descriptions of and naming of plants. So many plants that I didn't even ever know the name of before I saw them in that context.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like, wow. And it was like, well, because it's English, I had to trust him that these were real things. But I think our tolerance of that goes down when we know that we're in the hands of someone who's just making all this shit up.
Well, and I don't know. There's another thing about that of being like someone who's well read in genre, and you come across that time and time again. And I think sometimes I get a little impatient with things that, for like a younger reader, like my 12-year-old self, has had a great love of Tolkien and felt really immersed in the world. And since I've gotten older and read more, and I've come to expect certain things, that kind of dense description and things like I find sometimes, not always, but sometimes I really don't have patience for it anymore. It's like I have to be in a specific frame of mind now. Whereas when I was a young reader and just discovering, it was all just awesome, you know?
Yeah. The whole idea of relevance to the plot and all that is really, really critical.
Yes.
But to get back to animals, the other day I was going around, walking around the lake. We've got a small domesticated lake in my town.
It purrs when you dip your toe in it.
And always fun to go over there because you see a lot of wildlife, lots and lots of wild birds, and then you see geese and ducks and coots, which are sort of not, you know, they're wild, but they're not quite, because they do get fed by people who come to the park, even though people are told not to feed the birds in the park, right? The other day we were there, and I saw a guy walking around the lake with a parrot on his shoulder. And I thought, you know, you see people walking there with dogs all the time, right? You never see anybody walk with cats, though my friend in Japan walks her cat.
Nisi Shawl walks her cat, Minnie, all the time.
Who does?
Nisi Shawl.
Oh, Nisi Shawl, yeah. So people do walk cats. Though I've never seen it, I've never seen somebody walk a cat in a book. Now I'm going to have to write a story where someone walks a cat. But anyway, the parrot on the shoulder was funny because parrot on shoulder is such a sort of iconic pirate thing.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's taken on this completely alternate meaning, right? Because I guess it's not really that common for people to carry parrots on their shoulders. And there must have been some pirate thing where at least one or two of them carried parrots, because how else would there, you know, this whole thing just expanded. Maybe it is even just one person whose legend, you know, expanded. But I think it's kind of funny.
I think it only exists where people can tolerate bird poo down the back of their coat.
Oh, oh dear. Well, there was Radagast with the bird poo in the Hobbit movie. That always struck me as rather unfortunate. But actually, thinking about the iconicity of the pirate and parrot, it would be very interesting, I think, if one were working with an alien environment, to have some kind of person plus domesticated animal pairing that was super iconic for that society. You know, I have actually thought about that question, Pat. Pat just asked, what if things were reversed and another species decided to domesticate us? Yeah, it is a really good question. I actually wonder if we'd know.
I think it would be good for some things. Hunting dogs.
Yeah.
Possibly herding animals. As long as they didn't have us herding cats.
Oh my gosh.
We could do it for fiber's sake, you know?
Yeah. Well, entertainment. Because, I mean, human beings are infinitely strange creatures, really.
That's pretty funny. You know, it struck me, and I haven't come up with a good story for it yet, but it would be very interesting if we got domesticated in some environment by another species and we didn't quite notice that that was what was really going on. Everybody always talks about, you know, how our cats train us, not the other way around.
Like the mice and the hitchhikers and...
Yes, yes.
But it sounds very lizard people conspiracy theory, too. It's always fun. I love that stuff.
I wouldn't want to be on somebody's dinner list, you know?
No.
No.
Just for lunch.
Well, that certainly has been done.
Yeah.
We're going to eat you now thing. At very least in the... Gosh, it goes as far back as C.S. Lewis. He had a "we're going to eat you now" thing in the fourth book.
Yeah.
About eating us, but domesticating us would start changing us to improve that experience for them, not for us. So they might change us in ways we don't expect.
Well, that's interesting. Well, like, and think about like how we have animals, domesticated animals that do perform specific, very specific tasks for us. What would they have humans doing? I mean, let's imagine that the aliens were much larger than we were, and they needed things from small places, right? We have these hands that are very useful. You know, like they're, you know, almost like if they needed detail work done on machinery.
Yeah, or I'm thinking about the, you know, the kids who make carpets.
Yes.
If you're working, if you say the alien species has very, very large hands, but quite good visual acuity, so that they can enjoy something that has a smaller pattern, then they can actually make with their own tools.
Yeah.
Then humans might well be a good answer for that.
This is a little creepy thinking about this.
Yeah.
But we love it.
Well, they might want to change us for our benefit, not just to use us.
Yes, that's true.
No, I'm on a conference call.
I'm wondering. Now I'm thinking about our benefit.
I know, like, what would they want to do to us to, like, make us better in some way? And of course, with like humans will get ideas about how to make life better for a group of humans that they don't understand the culture or whatever. Like, those ideas could be completely wrong-headed and have the opposite effect if things are worse. Or let's say it could potentially actually be better, but human beings are resistant. I think by nature we're often resistant to being told what to do. Particularly, I mean, and that might be a very American notion also. But this general spirit of independence, I just imagine that would be really, it wouldn't sit well. So that could be such an awesome source of conflict.
Well, you know, what if some alien species decided to breed out, you know, mental illness? We'd end up without a lot of our creative faculties.
Yeah.
Right.
You know. So these things don't come without a price. And then you'd have to say, well, you wonder whether there would be as there were with the foxes in Russia, whether there would be a constellation of features that we might have that would change at the same time.
Yeah. That's a good point.
That sounds something like the uplift that David Brin put in all of his books.
Uh-huh.
Except that the gorillas weren't happy with all of the changes, and neither were the chimpanzees.
Right.
So
Yeah.
much is considered to be uplifted. More intelligence might be good, more creativity, but we're a rather disorderly bunch. So maybe
Yeah.
they want a little more cohesion.
That's interesting. Calmness. They would maybe, in an effort to make us less violent, try to make us calmer, and that would probably, we would lose a lot of things. Like, I'm thinking about people who are notoriously well known for being kind of hyperactive that have given us either strides in art or science, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes, I mean, these are really big personalities, and sometimes they can be taxing to be around. But the benefit is that we have beautiful art, or we have this amazing progress in some area. That the way their brain works has had something to do with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of specific examples, but I can't right now. I probably should not have put schnapps in my coffee.
Well, you mean of the people who were not maybe neurotypical, but who've made great innovations?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I would say Steve Jobs probably.
Isaac,
Okay.
Isaac
Uh,
Newton is considered to
Temple
be
Grandin has done some amazing things because of her extraordinary perceptions of the world and how it works. I mean, the list is long once you start getting into it. So
Yeah.
Well, or just creativity. What if they try to make us more calmer and less independent? It might cut into creativity.
yeah, I think it probably would. I think it probably would.
I've seen one study where they were looking at that at filters. So they were looking at people who are schizophrenic, people who are creative, and people who are autistic. And you could see across the spectrum that people who could not filter out anything were on the autistic side. People who were schizophrenic could filter out all sorts of things, but they couldn't do it reliably to tell what's real around them. And creative people seem to have leaky filters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And what would an alien species looking at human beings think of as neurotypical? Would their definition be different?
Exactly.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I mean, yeah. Plus, you have, I mean, there's so many different ways that they could be different, too, because, you know, metabolically, they could be just set in a different way from us, right?
Yeah.
When I made my otter aliens, I tried to make them a little bit more like otters. And it's really not a great idea to keep an otter as a pet because it just has so much energy that you can't deal. Right? So it does not make a good pet animal because it's, you know, cats at least tend to run on kind of slow, right? They go way up high and then they go, you know, they get really kind of wee, and then they just kind of crash out for a long while. And then dogs, you know, they need to have their exercise, and you take them out for a walk, and we're willing to do that. But then, you know, then they're relatively calmer. Whereas, oh my gosh, the video I saw of this baby otter, it was real busy. You know, it was playing with baby toys, and it was just, you know, kind of chewing through them out of this just manic, Whee! So basically when I made the otter people, I made them very sort of hyper.
Mm-hmm.
And really, they're just really very attentive and busy all the time. But then I figured they would need to crash out, right? Because if you have a lot of attentive, busy time, then you have to sleep. So yeah. That was why I designed the bridge of their spaceship to look like a nightclub. Because because they had they had a physical, basically tactile interaction hologram kind of control system, and they would be playing with this big ball of images from various regions of their control system, and fishing for the things they needed and blowing them up and changing things and then putting them back, and so they looked like they were kind of dancing, with the disco ball effect. And then, of course, their couch is all the way around the outside because whenever you're tired, you just go and take a nap. And so the human walks in and it's like, okay, what is this? I think, you can do a lot with that. You can say, oh, well, these people are not going to have the same concept of a bridge that we see so commonly across species in Star Trek, right?
Right.
Oh, and then by the way, they're going to be hungry a lot, so right off the bridge there's this door into their fish room.
Fish!
Yep. Whole room, totally full of water, held in by a force field. You wanna take a little snack, you just hop on through.
Have you seen that video of the otters that are being presented with a keyboard?
Yes.
Yes. Crazy.
Otters in the keyboard.
Maybe that's something we could be bred for. Our musical talents.
Oh yeah.
The otters dancing, actually dancing. Wouldn't they be great at something like river dance?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Better balance because they have the tails.
Yeah.
That would be funny.
Oh my gosh.
Well, and then the question is, what if you were to keep an otter as a pet? How active would you have to be?
That's like having a Dalmatian. You'd have to be very active.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
For an Australian cattle dog, they need a lot of physical activity, I heard.
Yes. Well, a lot of working animals do because they've been bred to work. And if they're not working, then they're bored, and if they're bored, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was just on a different topic. I was thinking about animals that we don't normally domesticate.
Mm-hmm.
And like in a story like, and you could probably use examples from probably our history about this, but animals we usually don't domesticate that become domesticated in some unusual circumstance, like I'm thinking of circus bears, because bears are not something that a lot of people would think to domesticate now, or
yeah.
Other animals that wasn't there, there were panthers at one point, it was like something that happened in the 60s, and it was really ill-advised. But I seem to remember that having been a trend among certain groups in an article I read. I mean, I don't live in the 60s, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's interesting to talk about what the difference is between domesticating and taming. Because as I understand it, species that do not domesticate well are species where you have to tame them each individually, and no traits of docility are passed on from generation to generation, no matter how hard you try. Because it's clear that people have these interactions with bears or with lions, you know, but they're super, you know, few and far between. And I'm wondering, you know, we've observed that process that, to some extent, that they went through with the foxes, where they were able to really cause them to change a lot genetically, and the new generation would be very much, you know, more inclined to interact with humans than the last one, right?
In some cases, I think you can actually go too far with the process. I was looking at something for a story that actually is about immunology, but it turns out that the camel species all have an interesting immunological system, and you can domesticate them a little too much because male llamas have to be raised by other male llamas, or they get really hard to deal with.
Huh.
They will select a human and decide that that's their mate, and sometimes behave accordingly, or they'll get weirdly aggressive. You can't raise a camel-type species, especially the males, in isolation from its own herd.
Huh. So they'll get really aggressive? Or
They can, yes.
rapey?
With male llamas, you basically have to get them fixed before they mature, or you're going to have a lot of bad behavior.
Okay.
Okay. I do know that, I mean, and I know this because I have a parrot, that with some parrots, and it's not all of them, but some will have behavioral problems if there's not like another bird. When they get a little bit older and they haven't bred, and then people will, and I think this is horrible, but they'll suggest to people who own parrots that the way to handle the behavior is to put them into breeding programs instead of handling the behavior, because parrots tend to, and whether there's other birds around or not in their environment, they will pick one person and that is their person, and some of them don't, unless they've been handled by multiple trainers their entire lives since they were little. They'll only like that one person. And I know my bird, she only likes me. That's it. That's the end. And I don't have too many problems with her. She can be a little aggressive sometimes, but I don't have there's no like bird sexual behaviors. And what's interesting to me about that is that I don't know like how do you recognize what that is in a bird, how different they are from mammals. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if...
Yeah.
Thinking about elephants, they don't fixate on us that way, but they definitely do the older elephants to come along and keep the younger males in line, kind of civilize them. Even in the wild, they do the same thing.
Well, of course, I had a kind of a horrible thought about the whole when the aliens domesticate humans and want to get them to calm down young males and such. Anyway,
problematic.
That would not be ideal. I mean, you know, humans are great, but you know, if you really want them to be well behaved in your herd, you have to geld some of them, and you know, like, I mean, we do that all the time, right? With cows, and never bat an eye, or with horses,
dogs,
cats.
Yeah, well, you know, fixing the cats and the dogs so that they don't overpopulate and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You might want to make some other changes. If I were going to change elephants, I would give them gastroliths like birds have. I'd give them a craw. Because they spend so much time having to eat vegetation and digest it, it takes up most of their workday. One of the problems they have working lumber elephants, because the elephants need to eat about 18 hours a day.
Wow.
it's been a practice in Thailand that they actually get them hooked on methamphetamine to get more work out of them, but then it breaks them down and they get malnourished.
Oh,
Wow.
great.
So there are
Wow.
Buddhist temples in Thailand now that are elephant refuges for these broken down lumber elephants.
Oh, wow. Now, what
One way to
drugs? I was gonna say, now the aliens, when they come to domesticate us, what do you think that they would give us drugs for? Like, what kind of drugs would the aliens come up with to control what behaviors? Like,
Well, I think it would have a lot to do with the environment.
okay.
I mean, are we in our environment or are we in their environment, and what exactly would that entail?
That could be anything from supplements to tranquilizers.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm seeing Earth left as a refuge for wild humans, while the domesticated humans are taken off to the alien planet.
Oh, that's a good one.
Great.
Way down the line, you have some of the domesticated humans come back and visit Earth.
Oh my gosh. That would be, yeah, wild human. And then, of course, on the world that's left behind, how much of the resources from the planet would the aliens have taken with them, leaving what behind for the wild humans?
Yeah. Oh, and I thought of something really important 2 seconds ago, and now I forgot. Well, I don't know who the game wardens would be.
Can I be one? I want to be one.
Well, it would be kind of even more interesting if the wild humans on Earth were allowed to think that they were in control of Earth, and that the game wardens were just, they just happened to be there as diplomats and whatever, and very much, and they thought there was this great program of going out to, to do cultural interchange with these other aliens and whatever.
This could be what the cats are up to.
It could be. It could be.
And now I'm trying to think of what that was that I was trying to think of a minute ago. I had a really interesting thought, but I can't remember. I guess my tea was not completely effective.
You needed some schnapps in your tea, too.
Yeah, but it might be a little early for that, honestly.
Out for you, yeah.
That's why the Irish invented Irish coffee.
All right. Well, okay. So I think that we are done with this topic for now, and thank you guys for coming. I'm going to stop the broadcast so that we can chit chat about Irish coffee off the air.
FCC's going to get us.
Watched, and I think next week we're going to talk about killing your darlings, and I think it's sort of a writing topic, but I think we can handle it from a world building perspective too. Oh yeah. And then I'm not going to have hangouts on the last 2 weeks of June because I'm going to be on vacation. Yay! But unlike other years, I will probably be doing hangouts in July rather than waiting till my kids go back to school. I think that they're old enough. We'll try this out to be respectful of our time. So, all right. See you next time. Bye.